Good afternoon, one and all. In the connection of the webinar series, today we have the webinar on recent trends in the humanities. And we have the stalwarts and the speaker with us, Dr. Mahendra M. is the assistant professor of the English School of Humanities and the Language, Central University of the Karnataka. So we welcome you, sir, Dr. Mahendra. We welcome you on behalf of the Parel University, on behalf of the Parel University Management, on behalf of the
Sure.
Parel University President, sir, and the Vice Chancellor, sir, and the Registrar, sir. So we are conducting the webinar on regular basis under the banner of the Parel University as well as the Parel Institute of Arts and Faculty of Arts in the various department. So we already conducted more than 80 webinar in the department, in various departments, on various topics. So we welcome you, sir, on behalf of the Parul University, and request to you please enlighten to us, enlighten to your participants and faculty members. And now I over to Ms. Ishani Patel. She is assistant professor in English department for your detailed introduction, and after that she will over to you for the begin your talk in the presentation, sir. So again, welcome to you, sir, on behalf of the.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Ishani, madam, please.
Very good afternoon to one and all, guys, and welcome to the wonderful session of webinar series as we are hosting, as Parul University is hosting the webinar series. So today we have a very important resource person. Today we have a very important member with us. Dr. Mahendra M, Professor Mahendra M from Central University of Karnataka. So let me, without wasting a single time, let me introduce to Mahendra sir. So Professor Mahendra M currently teaches at Department of English, School of Humanities and Languages at Central University of Karnataka. His area of specialization are mainly on literary theory and Caribbean literature. He is the member of the International Association for World English, and apart from this, he is also the member of Board of Studies at Central University of Karnataka and Sannavasa University, Kalaburgi. He has also served as a panel member and subject expert for the selection of teachers at Kendriya Vidyalaya, Gulbarga. Besides that, he is well known for his translations. He has translated various Punjabi and Dogri poems to Kannada and resided in Akashvani Gulbarga for the National Symposium of Poets, broadcasted on 26 January 2016 and 28 January 2018 all over India by All India Radio. He has also edited a book titled as Indian Multilingualism and Language Behavior. He has also received Best Inspiring Teacher Award from Central University of Karnataka on 5th September 2013. He has also published and presented many talks at various national and international conferences, seminars, and workshops. He has also participated as a resource person and delivered the talks on the topics such as Shakespeare in Kannada literature and culture, Dr. Rajkumar and Social Change, which is an Indian theatre and cinema. Then Dalit Studies, Caribbean Literature, Feminism, Literary Theory and Praxis, Translation Studies, Disability Studies, and many more to go in various national and international conferences. So, sir, now I am handing over this entire panel to you. And today webinar topic is very cool. It's very unique, as we already know that. So I am handing over this webinar to you. So please.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Ishani. First of all, let me extend my thanks to Professor Ramesh Kumar Rawat, Professor in Journalism and Mass Communication, and also Dean Faculty of Arts. And again, I thank all the faculty members of the Parul University, and I thank the Registrar, Vice Chancellor, and the coordinators or organizers of this particular webinar. Thank you very much for inviting me on this conference. So, the topic that I have chosen to speak is recent trends in the humanities. So, firstly, let me speak broadly about the understanding of humanities at first. So, what do we understand about humanities? And next part of my lecture, I will just go back to the recent trends in the humanities. But before moving on to that particular part, I would like to speak very briefly about understanding the humanities, because we live in times which give more importance to natural sciences, physical sciences, and many other disciplines, but not the humanities and social science. And what is the importance of understanding humanities and social science is the need of this particular part. And before getting to speak or getting into the details of my talk on recent trends in the humanities, I would like to briefly speak about understanding the humanities. What is this humanities all about? What do we understand by the word humanities? So, in the previous times, especially in the classical Greece time, no, the classical Greek notion of humanities was to provide the basis of a broader education for the Greek citizens. It was meant for educating the Greek citizens, and especially they relied on concepts of liberal arts as its roots in such particular tradition. However, the term humanities probably appeared first during the Italian Renaissance in the later times, and it is in relation to the education of Christians for their moral and spiritual development. This particular humanities was introduced in the Italian Renaissance. And if you look at this particular development of the humanities, okay, first it was used as a broader education platform for Greek citizens, and in the later times it was used by Italians during the Renaissance to link it with the Christians for their moral as well as spiritual development. But today, the conception of the humanities has broadly changed. And today, the term refers to those disciplines of knowledge which are broadly concerned with human thoughts, creative expressions, and culture. And they are classified as non-science academic disciplines. So the problem with the current academic interactions is that humanities never goes hand in hand with the physical sciences and the natural sciences, because we have critics like Henry Xerox or even Foucault, who have long debated about the kind of interdisciplinarity and the multidisciplinarity we need in order to develop the knowledge system. But unfortunately, we have stuck on to something called specialization, and we do not think beyond a particular discipline. So the concept of interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity has become only a concept in the recent times. But when we think of the humanities and the social sciences, they have more to do with the natural sciences and the physical sciences. So we have more to interact, more to research, more to collaborate, and by collaborating we would be exploring varied or varieties of knowledge which are hidden in the recent times. But unfortunately this is not happening, and now the discipline is restricted to only, I mean, the humanities discipline is restricted to only human thoughts, creative expressions, and culture, and this is treated as non academic discipline. So again, broadly speaking, humanities include the various branches of knowledge which explore the process of creative intervention that human makes in imaginatively interpreting and expressing the meaning of their lived experiences. And obviously, when we think of humanities, we only relate it with the lived experiences, especially in connection with the imaginative process which are involved in creating or expressing meaning of their lived experiences, and it has not linked to the natural sciences and the physical sciences. I am trying to draw your attention to two important factors that are happening in the academic platform in the recent times. And people always, when we think of a particular triangle, okay, we only think of the natural and physical sciences, and we would never think of the social sciences and the humanities. Okay, we may, if we like, think of all knowledge as assuming the form of a triangle, of which one apex is occupied by the natural and physical sciences, another by the social sciences, and the third by the humanities. They have something to do with each other. Okay, and we cannot treat in isolation humanities or natural sciences in isolation, physical sciences in isolation, and we have to allow it to interact it with one another. But our basic understanding of the natural and physical sciences is that it deals only with man's environment. Okay, and the most remote as well as the most immediate, again, the social sciences with man and his association with other men, because it has something to do with the associations or the society, and we are not thinking beyond it. Okay, and again, when we think of the humanities, it concerns itself with the manifestation of the spiritual existence and the lived experiences, and it is also treated in isolation. So the figure of the triangle is convenient in that it emphasizes the close union of three fields of study. We have to look in such a way that we need to blend, okay, juxtapose the knowledge system that exists in the natural, physical science, and the social sciences and the humanities. So then only something new can be thought of, something very recent trends can be thought about. So obviously, the natural sciences are complemented by the humanities, and they later find their extension in the social sciences, and which must also depend upon them, as well as upon the natural and as well as physical sciences for fundamental data. For any sort of research, for any sort of data, the fundamental data, it has to rely on one another. Okay, for example, for the humanities, man is inseparable from his physical environment. Okay, which is related to the social science, from his association. Okay, not even by ascending into stratosphere can he escape from either. Okay, I as a human being, I'm linked to everything. I'm linked to natural science, physical science, social science, and humanities. I cannot be removed at all. So therefore, it is the need for us to establish a sort of interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity in the context of the sciences as well as social sciences and humanities. So the task of the humanities is to recover all that may be recovered from the spiritual experience of mankind throughout the ages of human history and throughout the entire scene of human activity, and to interpret this particular experience for the enrichment of life as it must be lived in the present. Okay, and obviously the intention or the objectives of the humanities is all related to the lived experiences of a human being. So the data of the humanities are all the manifestations of the spiritual life of man, expressed in spoken or written language, or in artistic, musical, or other actions. So their methods are historical and descriptive, whether they are true sciences or whether they are something less than, and at the same time something more, does not greatly matter at all, because we are looking only for the data wherein what is so important for us is again the spoken and the written language, artistic, musical, or any sort of language or data it could be, and their validity actually depends upon the selection, critical study, and appraisal of their data, and their conclusions are significant in proportion to their bearing upon the needs of human existence, not the least of which is reliable knowledge of past experience. So therefore, what is so important for us is the past experience, when it comes to the humanities. So what do we study under the humanities? Okay, and people, it's been very customary to refer to the humanities as the historical and philological studies, and to designate their numerous disciplines by such terms as cultural anthropology, linguistics, archaeology, history, classics, modern languages and literatures, oriental studies, and the history of art and music, etc., are treated, are studied in the broader platform of humanities. So to these terms have usually been added to those that designate the so-called auxiliary sciences, that is the specialized skills such as epigraphy, paleography, diplomatics, ceramics, numismatics, etc., that make it possible to read and interpret the remains of civilization. So within the humanities, we have some other important factors connected to this particular happening, and we have some sort of specialized skills used in humanities as well, and which are connected to the auxiliary sciences. So the collective term humanities refers therefore to a vast and complex group of studies, many of which are highly specialized, but all of which are related by a common ultimate objective to contribute to the recovery and interpretation of the spiritual experience of mankind. So ultimately, we have the humanities, okay, and it which obviously discuss about all these disciplines, all these subjects which I discussed a few minutes ago. And the first of these is the increasingly clear and general recognition of the ultimate objective of the humanities. As just stated, the recovery and interpretation of the spiritual experiences of mankind is very important for the humanities. And with this a sort of introduction, I will just move on to the topic of my presentation. And the topic of my presentation is the recent trends in the humanities. And obviously, we have something to do with the sciences. I am mentioning the sciences, both natural and physical sciences, because since a very long time, the critics have been arguing of the necessity of bringing in the natural sciences and physical sciences to the study of social sciences and the humanities. So there is a need, and only when such a need is fulfilled, you can think of the recent trends. Okay, and we have too many emerging trends in the humanities. It possibly happened because of such interaction, such interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. And we study humanities in the in the broader context of the humanity as a whole, and human experiences and lived experiences have to be connected with the natural sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. And you cannot think of any of these disciplines in isolation. Okay, and it is the necessity for us to go out of the so-called specialization, because you have seen, this is what even Henry Xerox argues in his wonderful essay, Need for Cultural Studies. Okay, that is the title of the essay. And he argues that we do not make a sort of interaction, in terms of research or in terms of teaching with other disciplines. So if I am a professor of sociology, I think of my specialization. I do not want to interact with the literature students or literature department of literature. So sociology has something to do with the literature. So when we interpret a literary text, it has so many factors which goes into it. We see it from the cultural factors, social factors, or political, economical factor. So for which we need to make an interaction with another discipline. And if I compartmentalize literature and do not allow it to interact with another discipline, probably the whole exercise of interpretation fails over there. So there is a necessity for us to interact with the physics. There is a necessity for us to interact with the engineering department or computer science or even with the chemistry. It is possible. It's very much possible. And that possibility I am speaking, because until today, whatever the emerging or the emerged, recent trends, especially in the humanities, had such interactions. And because of that, you have fields like digital humanities, medical humanities, disability studies, trauma studies, fourth world studies, geocriticism. What are they? What it has to do with the digital. Okay, and now in the digital humanities we are interacting with the computers, and no single person belonging to a discipline like humanity alone can do it, because it's a teamwork. We need professionals from the computer science, okay, or the people who know computer, because we are going to assimilate, intersect two disciplines in order to speak broadly about the digital humanities. So what it has do, what humanities has to do with medical sciences. So if you look at the recent trends, emerging trends, especially you find a fact that humanities is interacting with many other disciplines. So then only this kind of recent trends can happen. So next slide, Ishani. So now, what is this digital humanities is all about? Okay, and what is necessary for us to study the digital humanities? So, as I was telling, it has something to do with the computer science and the humanities. So, if at all, humanities are the professors of computer science or any other disciplines, if they thought that they are specialized and they cannot study anything else, probably we can never thought of digital humanities, and it's an emerged area. Okay, and people are working exhaustively on this particular area in the recent times. Okay, and this is one of the important trends that has happened in the humanities, and we study it under the recent trends, and it is first of the trends that I would be discussing about. So what is this digital humanities all about? It is the ways in which the humanities and the digital technologies intersect. There is a possibility, and of course it is already proven that the humanities can always intersect with or interact with digital technologies. Okay, and of course I was trying to discuss about the humanities in my first part of the talk, and humanities is all about people or the human society. Humanities are academic disciplines that study aspects of human society and culture, and it is linked to both humanities and social sciences. So, what do we study in humanities? All these subjects come under the humanities: anthropology, archaeology, classics, communication studies, economics, education, history, linguistics and language, law and politics, musicology, human geography, jurisprudence, literature, philosophy, political science, psychology, public health, religion, sociology, arts, visual arts, and performing arts, etc. It is they're all part of the humanities and the social sciences. So how can we interact these particular disciplines or subjects with the computer science? So again, let us look at the definition of these digital technologies. What is it? So how can we club digital technology with humanities? Now it says digital humanities are electronic tools, systems, devices, and resources that generate, store, or process data. Now it includes application softwares. They are called the tools, which includes text editors, text analysis, photo editing, text encoding, video editing, social media, and so on. And secondly, it also includes the process, which is linked to the actions. We do document scanning, we do OCR, encoding, indexing, referencing, data formatting, data analysis, data converting, and so on. And we create content, especially the digital data, which is referred to as digital text, digital audio, digital images, digital video, web pages and websites, data and database, electronic books, etc. Now you see in the recent times, so many things being upgraded to digital technologies. So we listen to the podcasts. What are they? Okay, we read online books, digital books. Okay, and we have digital text in the recent times. How is it happening? If the digital technology do not wanted to intersect with the humanities, probably the humanities would have remained an isolated, compartmentalized discipline, but it's not happening. So we could able to create the content, the digital data. It is happening only because we are interacting with another department. We are studying how to make a voice modulation when something is read out, because you come across digital audio or podcasts which expects which needs a sort of training in voice modulation. And as a student of literature, you know how to give that particular voice precisely and how it should be recorded. Okay, and our web pages are whatever we write, it is created as a web page today We publish quite a lot of information in social media. We write poems, we write short stories in Instagram, and it is being shared. So how is it happening? It is happening because of the digital technologies, which are tools, systems, devices, and we are creating resources by processing that particular data. So this is something which is very important for us. Next slide, Ishani. So what is the definition of the digital humanities then? So the digital humanities is born of the encounter between traditional humanities and computational methods. So this is what Anne Boudic says. So she defines digital humanities like this: there is a sort of encounter between traditional humanities and the computational methods. Intersecting of these two is resulted in the digital humanities, and this is what the digital humanities is all about. Okay, and traditional humanities, if you go back to again 80s and 90s, you study what is referred to as, I should not use pure, or let me use the word traditional humanities, but you don't find the traditional humanities in the recent times because it is much more advanced. We are trying to integrate one discipline with another discipline, one subject with another subject, and therefore, so this whole aspect of the traditional humanities is changed to advanced humanities, and it has happened because of the integrating or integration of the medical sciences, or computer sciences, or whatever, engineering, to the traditional humanities. So you have one more important critic, Johanna Drucker, who defines digital humanities like this: digital humanities is work at the intersection of digital technology and humanities discipline. It could be any discipline for that matter. You can create an hypertext of the history. You click on a particular word, it takes you to that etymology of that particular word, and it explains something else. So everything is created in the form of an hypertext today. The digital technology is used in such a way that you try to give the best of the best from the humanities discipline to the whole world. Okay, and therefore digital humanities can be attributed or can be studied or intersected with different disciplines. So this is something which both of these critics have spoken about. So what is this digital humanities is all about? What are these what are the objectives of digital humanities? So the goal of the digital humanities is to integrate modern information technology into traditional humanistic research and teaching process. We are trying to integrate one with another. Okay, and it gathers, refines, maintains, and share cultural resources that can be subsequently be used and refined by scholars and members of the community. Okay, and it includes all of this process. It gathers, it refines, it maintains, it shares cultural resources which are very important for scholars, members of the community. So therefore this is very important to note that the very objective of the digital humanities is to create a wonderful resources for the scholars as well as the members of the community. So it is creating a digitally recorded traditional humanistic research for the teaching process or maybe for the research process. So this is something which is very important for us. If you look at again the success of digital humanities, so the discipline of digital humanities is becoming the center of academic activity in the recent times, and most of the universities have started the research programs, and in the universities, and especially in the West, it has become a sort of hype. That people are studying digital humanities like never before, and especially hundreds of scientific research centers of digital humanities worldwide are seen in the recent times, and digital humanities are taught at universities around the world. Okay, and the conferences are held in the entire world, and scientific journals are dedicated to this digital humanities. So again, if you look at the kind of historical milestones that we have with regard to the digital humanities, and how the humanities is closely linked to the development of the computer. You can trace it back to 1949. Okay, and in 1949, it so happens that the with the help of IBM, it is Robert Busa, an Italian geophysicist, embarks on a major computer-assisted edition project. Okay, and for the first time, he does an indexing of the work of Thomas Aquinas. Okay, and for the first time, this digital humanities happened in 1949. Especially in the Italy, and for the first time, indexing of the work of Thomas Aquinas, the priest, happened in 1949, and this is how the digital humanities historically took birth. And in 1973, especially again, Europe's digital humanists formed the Association for Literary and Linguistic Computing. Okay, computational linguistics is a very popular subject now. Okay, computational linguistics, and for the first time in 1973, the Association of Literary and Linguistic Computing was formed in order to give a touch to the linguistics as well as the computer science. In 1986, again, Literary and Linguistic Computing, LLC, the leading specialist journal, was published in the in the year 1986. And again in 1994, there is a technical standards are set with TEI, a format for encoding and exchanging text that is still used today. Okay, and in 2004, Google Books were added. It was born in 2004, and today this online project is the largest library in the world with an estimated of 25 million books or million titles. So in 2006, the Digital Humanities Initiative was launched in the USA. Okay, funding programs gives a push to the entire research field. Okay, and if you are planning to work on digital humanities, there is a huge funding for this particular research or particular program. So this sort of historical milestone prove us very much that there is a need for us to have digital humanities projects in the humanities department. And as I was telling, digital humanities projects are interdisciplinary, and digital humanities projects are labor intensive and require the work of project teams and collaborators, because it cannot be worked in a lonely workforce, and it needs collaboration from other department. It needs help from other teams, especially computer science or engineering. So they are referred to as project teams or collaborators. It's important because we have to work in collaboration with another department. So especially it so happens that most of the faculties recruited in the humanities department are not very well acquainted with the technicality involved in creating the digital text. So it is necessary for us to collaborate. Okay, and therefore it is labor intensive and require the work of project teams and collaborators. And this is something that we need to think about. So especially when we have something called digital humanities projects, they involve a team or a lab which may be composed of a faculty, staff, or a student, or information technology specialists, and even partners in galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Without their support, it is not possible. So therefore, digital humanities projects allow people to step outside the world of print and enter a world of interactive maps. Okay, today we have interactive maps. So you click on that, you get wonderful information about that particular place, and you can walk digitally. And I mean, there is a 3D map also, which allows you to look at certain places of importance virtually, through an interactive map. And you can access to digital timelines, and archives containing millions of digital books can be accessed because of the digital humanities projects. So this is something that I just wanted to mention about first of the trends that happened in the humanities. So secondly, you have something called the medical humanities. At times people refer to this as the philosophy. Okay, but again, it is also the arts, humanities, and social sciences. act as a counterbalance to the relentless reductionism of the biomedical sciences, which rely on knowledge that enhances the order and predictability of diagnosis, investigation, and treatment. So, what is this medical humanities doing here? So, I was listening to Praveen, who delivered a wonderful talk on medical humanities, I think 2 days ago, and he was very clearly explaining, what exactly the medical humanities is all about. So, in the recent times, you have a medical humanities, which is also in some sense, trying to intersect the biomedical sciences with that of arts, humanities, and social sciences. Okay, and it is trying to bring in a counterbalance to the relentless, reductionism of the biomedical sciences. Now, at times we were thinking that we don't have anything to do with the medical sciences, biomedical sciences. It is related to diagnosis, investigation, and treatment. How we can relate the arts, humanities, and social sciences with that. But the time has come to integrate and again intersect, juxtapose biomedical sciences with the humanities. Okay, and it happens in at different levels altogether. Okay, history, philosophy, and sociology warn that the person with the disease is all too easily reduced to the non-hygienic, non-rational, disordered other. So when we treat a patient, we always speak about these non-hygienic, non-rational, disordered, the other. We always treat a patient as another, and we never think of him or her as a fellow being. So the disease makes them another, and there is no human touch to the medical sciences. We treat him as another, and if he is disabled, he is another. If he has a long illness, he becomes another. It is very precisely true with the case of this pandemic. If you are tested positive for COVID-19, you become suddenly another. The way people treat you, unimaginable. You the process of treating someone as another is taken up for study, and you need to give a sort of humanistic touch to the medical sciences as well. So you need to understand the narrative of a patient or a narrative of a doctor, and how a particular illness is created, how a particular disease is created. By creating, so how you become another is also important idea that they took, and they started working on this medical humanities, and which is also an important studies in the recent times. And these are not abstract or outdated notions as such. We all see doctors who make it quite clear that patients are an irritating obstruction between themselves and the disease. So, in the process of curing a disease, you come across a doctor treating the patient in a very unconducive manner. So it happens most of the times. So how can we build that humanity or humanistic touch when we think of the medical sciences? Can we make it more human? Is a question which the medical humanities takes up, and it's of course philosophical. Okay, and it is non-rational to think about all of this, but it has become a sort of rational discipline in the recent times, a trend in the recent times, that people think about medical humanities, and they are trying to give a humanistic touch to healing of a particular disease. So medical humanities has been defined as an integrated, interdisciplinary, philosophical approach to recording and interpreting human experiences of illness, disability, and medical intervention. So it's a philosophical approach since it involves an interdisciplinary or an integrated approach in understanding, in interpreting the human experiences of illness and disability. So if you are a COVID patient, for example, you will have a sort of experience, which one must, or one should able to understand. So the person who undergoes that particular situation can only narrate that illness. So there is a social exclusion, which is part of this particular illness. If you have a particular disease, you are excluded from the society, from your community. If you are disabled, you are treated very badly as another. So therefore, it is a philosophical approach in recording and interpreting the human experiences of illness and disability. So again, you have a definition of medical humanities, and it is a sustained interdisciplinary inquiry into aspects of medical practice, education, and research expressively concerned with the human side of medicine. Of course, we agree to the fact that medicine is rational, it's all scientific, but there is also a human side to it. Okay, and it medical humanities makes an attempt to understand or inquiry the aspects of medical practices, with the human side of medicine. This is what it does. It's very simple. Medical humanities makes a particular person to understand the lived experiences of a human being who is a patient from the humanistic perspective. It does make an attempt. So, medical humanities, it includes several fields like biomedical, philosophical, historical, artistic, literary, anthropological, and sociological fields. And you can take up any of these areas for your study, and accordingly try to approach these many studies from the medical humanities perspective. So further, medical humanities is concerned with how an understanding of the humanities may provide an insight and understanding to medical practice that is qualitatively different to a scientific viewpoint. Okay, for example, science says cold, unfeeling, and sometimes dangerous, but humanity says warm-hearted and well-intentioned, but possibly less scientific. So there are two contradictions here, but there is an attempt to integrate the medical sciences with the humanities. So further, if you think of the medical sciences, there are certain things that we have to do as the teachers or the researchers in this particular field. So there is a necessity for us to include the curriculum of medical schools, the humanities also, because the curriculum of medical science is designed in such a way that disciplines in the humanities are not included, thereby preventing more medical practitioners from having an understanding of the belief and culture of their patient with regard to the notion of health, sickness, and their cure. Okay, and there should be a paper from the humanities perspective wherein there should be some sort of a curriculum related to the belief and culture of the patients, especially with regard to the notion of health, sickness, and their cure. And again, the question is, should some kind of subjects in the humanities become part of the curriculum of a college of medicine? Is also a question. Possibly, yes. We can make it a part of the syllabus so that the practitioners, especially medical practitioners, would have should have some idea about the humanities and the approaches in which you need to approach a particular patient. And should literature be used in patient care? Of course, yes. There are evidences which says that a particular patient was recovered from so and so illness through reading literatures. It could be anything, a poem or a short story, or anything. It could be. There is a possibility that by reading something, you would recover very fastly. And obviously, there is a need for doctors to have a greater understanding of their profession, and be well groomed right from the school to be able to respond effectively to the variety of emotions that may be displayed by patients. So it has something to do with the understanding of the doctor and the patients. And there are literatures produced from since time immemorial, which has presented the patient in a very bad light, and there were no attempts to study that narrative since a very long time, and due to this particular field, especially the medical humanities, there are attempts to understand the narratives of the patients or the lived experiences of a particular patient in recovering from a particular disease. So we are all taking up that for the studies in the recent times, and the same is being studied. So what are these medical humanities good for? Okay, and it is good for reducing the gap between biomedicine and the human sciences, okay, such as philosophy, history, sociology and anthropology. And it is also helpful in facilitating interdisciplinary teaching and research. And so many researchers are working on this, and they have coming up with wonderful research on medical humanities. And it also helps in promoting a patient centered approach to medical care. Okay, we need to listen to the narratives of a patient and approach to medical care. And reducing biomedical hubris, it is also helpful. At the same time, it also helps in equipping doctors to meet moral challenges not covered by biomedicine. These are all the fields which are very much necessary for the medical humanities. So this is also an important emerging trend in the humanities. And the third one is disability studies. uh, we are aware of the problems faced by the specially abled people. And of course we have a particular trend that is happening in the humanities, and in the recent times there are too many researchers happening on this particular area. And obviously you have Davis Leonard in his disability studies reader. He defines what again what is disability studies is all about. He says, I quote, disability studies is a field of study whose time has come. For centuries, people with disabilities have been oppressed and repressed group. People with disabilities have been isolated, incarcerated, observed, written about, operated on, instructed, implanted, regulated, treated, institutionalized, and controlled to a degree probably unequal to that experienced by any other minority group. So Davis Leonard is trying to give us a exact problem in treating the person with disability. So how have we created them? And if someone is disabled, he is certainly isolated, okay, and is treated with some sort of hatredness. And it is at times it happens that we treat someone with a lot of sympathy which is not needed for them, okay, and they are institutionalized, they are controlled, to a degree of probably unequal to the experiences of the minority group. And they are made felt themselves as a minority group. This is what has happened throughout the centuries. And again, if you look at the narratives of a disabled man in any of the literatures produced from again centuries, you start to feel, you begin to feel that there is a sort of overlapping in the narration, and we have failed to understand that sort of oppressed as well as repressed mental condition of the disabled person. So the whole of the literature has done something like this. And disability studies inquires into the ways in which disability is constructed and circulated in a given social situation. So like gender is constructed, this disability is also constructed. So we feel very sympathetic about another, that is disabled person, and we try to create a sort of atmosphere for that particular person, that he feels always embarrassing in order to walk, in order to sit. We create that disableism, abnormality, and we try to give them the charity, sympathy, and it makes them feel another. At the same time, you're also constructing and circulating the disability in the social situation. So we are only doing it, and all the literature so far have done that. And there is an attempt of, on the part of the literary, especially disability studies, is that it is trying to understand the narration from the disabled person's point of view, and is trying to, it is also trying to understand how a certain disability or abnormality is created and circulated in the given social situation. And it also questions the binaries which exist between ableism and disableism, normality and abnormality, charity and rights. There is always a difference between ableism and disableism, normality, abnormality, charity and rights. Okay, and it is their right to enjoy all the privileges that we all enjoy, but we give them as a charity. There is nothing called ableism and disableism, and we have created it, and we have circulated to such an extent that it has become a part of the social construct now. But the disability studies is fighting for the it is again a political struggle of the disabled population, and they are trying to reconstruct historically all the accounts which are erased, and which is again absent in the entire historical accounts. They are trying to look at the erasure and absence of disability in historical accounts. So this is also being taken up for the study, and you have some research interest in the disability studies, which studies the representation of the disabled in literary texts, and disability and body politics, disabled gender, disability and aesthetics, disability and orality performativity, disability and media studies, disability and bioethics. So these are some of the areas of research which are part of the disability studies in the recent times. So again, apart from these disability studies, one important studies that we have is again trauma studies, and I'm going a bit faster because I'm running short of time. It's already 3:42. Yeah, trauma studies, is also an important area which is already emerged, because Kathy Gareth and Sigmund Freud have exhaustively worked on these trauma studies since a very long time. So the term trauma theory first appeared in Kathy Garrett's important book titled Unclaimed Experience, wherein she argues about the trauma like this. The theory arguably stems from our insightful interpretation and elaboration of Freud's deliberations on traumatic experiences in Beyond the Pleasure Principle and Moses and Monotheism. Okay, this is an important, again, these two are an important text by Sigmund Freud, and she takes up this particular idea of traumatic experiences and works on that, and she develops a theory called trauma theory, which is an important area of study in the recent times. What Freud once called traumatic neurosis, the American Psychiatric Association in 1980 officially acknowledged and termed as post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's called PTSD, a concept central to trauma theory. And you have Kathy Gareth, who have written very elaborately on post-traumatic stress disorder. And obviously, Kathy Gareth, defines this post-traumatic stress disorder as, I quote, a response sometimes delayed to an overwhelming event or events, which takes the form of repeated hallucinations, dreams, thoughts, or behaviors stemming from the event. The event is not assimilated or experienced fully at the time, but only belatedly. To be traumatized is precisely to be possessed by an image or an event. So this is from Unclaimed Experience, wherein she has defined what exactly this post traumatic stress disorder is all about, which Sigmund Freud also spoke as traumatic neurosis. And they approach us as any trauma for that matter. It could be an event or events. It reappears to us in the form of an hallucination, dream, thought, or behavior. We try to remember that, and it keeps haunting us. So the problem or the pressure of trauma is such that it keeps approaching. It keeps repeatedly appearing in the form of a dream, hallucination, or thoughts. Even if we do not want to remember, they keep coming to us. Okay, and it is called traumatic neurosis, and people suffer because of this traumatic neurosis. And Kathy Karth, for the first time, she theorizes the entire traumatic theory, and especially post-traumatic stress disorder, and she begins to understand all of this theory in a very important manner. So we have traumatic dream sources, Freudian dreams, which are two different aspects here, which I would be skipping for a while. And in the areas in trauma studies, of course, when we take up any literary text for interpreting from the trauma studies point of view, we always look for memory of trauma, latency of trauma, terror, horror, and trauma, traumatic neurosis and literature, elusiveness and lack of objectifiable truth with respect to trauma, ethical issues and trauma research, sexual aggression and trauma. These are all, some of the important areas connected to trauma studies. And whenever somebody takes up any interpretation or research analysis of a literary text, they would be looking at memory, latency, terror, horror, traumatic neurosis, sexual aggressions, and all that point of view are studied, um, in the context of uh, trauma studies. So, other than that, there is something called the fourth world studies, which is an important field of, I would say, trend in the humanities at present. And fourth world refers to the most underdeveloped, poverty stricken, and marginalized regions and population of the world. Ishani, can you please change the slide? Ishani? Ishani, am I audible? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So the fourth world studies is referred to as most underdeveloped, poverty stricken, and marginalized regions and population of the world. And up until today, we have heard of the first world, second world, and the third world, and we have not heard of the fourth world, until today. So there are too many theories about the first world being privileged, first and the second world. They have enjoyed all the privileges of being the uh, you know, very important regions. But again, there is also a theory related to third world literatures and third world studies. But the unexplored area again is related to the fourth world studies. Okay, and it is the most underdeveloped, poverty stricken, and marginalized regions of and population of the world. And many inhabitants of these nations do not have any political ties and are often hunter gatherers that live in nomadic communities or part of tribes. So now at present, the hunters, gatherers, or nomadic communities are part of this fourth world studies. And the outdated and offensive term fourth world is often linked to indigenous people. So we have never ever explored anything related to the aboriginals, indigenous population until today. And the fourth world studies tries to theorize the the these unexplored people, and it is about the indigenous people and the nomads and the hunters and gatherers. So if you look at the historical of development of this fourth world term, it was first, it was believed to have been first used in Canada by Buto Milendo, the first secretary of the Tanzanian, High Commission, in conversation with George Manuel, chief of the National Indian Brotherhood. For the first time, this particular word appeared in Canada, and Milando stated that, when I quote, when native peoples come into their own on the basis of their own cultures and traditions, that will be the fourth world. So for the first time, Milando uses this word in a different context altogether, because he is referring to the native people, and the natives are those aboriginals and indigenous people who are born and brought up in a particular region, and he is trying to speak about their cultures and traditions. And when they come up with their cultures and traditions, that will be referred to as the first world is stated then. But it was not that popular during those times in Canada, and the term became synonyms with stateless, poor, and marginal nations following the publication of Manuel's The Fourth World and Indian Reality in 1974. This is the title of the book, The Fourth World and Indian Reality, which was published in 1974 by Manuel, and he made a sort of synonym of this fourth world and developed a equivalent terms for the fourth world, and he stated that it is stateless, poor, and marginal nations, and these particular people we refer to as fourth world. So again, estimate shows that that there are about 5,000 to 6,000 cultural formations across the globe who belongs to internationally unrecognized spaces. They are not recognized at all. And it has become an unrecognized space because there is no access to reaching those particular place. So you have such an example in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Okay, there is a particular island which is not explored. Okay, and it has maintained its primitive existence even to this state, and it is very much evident that the literatures, cultures, and tradition of these peoples are not explored and even not recognized. So this particular fourth world studies only refers to those cultures which are internationally unrecognized spaces. These are mnemocultural formations that depends upon orality and performativity for their cultural and literary expression. There is no written account you find in the literatures of the aboriginals or the the gatherers, and obviously they are referred to as the aboriginals, the tribals, the stolen generations, forced immigrants, indigenous population, etc. Okay, and they're the people who completely depend upon orality and performativity for their cultural and literary expression, and there is no writing as of now from these indigenous as well as aboriginal people. So again, apart from that, you have something called geocriticism, which is a very recently explored area, and people refer to it as space studies as well. And geocriticism has become an increasingly significant practice within literary studies over the past few years. Even if the exact meaning of the geocriticism is not found, and the term itself, along with its characteristics and methods, has not been definitely settled because there is still research going on with regard to geocriticism. Its application of geographical, ideas or methods into the analysis of literature. So you study a particular space. Okay, it is related to people also at times refer to it as special humanities because some people have already published with these titles: special humanities, literary geographies, cartography, and so on. And therefore there is no particular method or characteristics attached to defining definition of geocriticism. It's not settled yet, but the emergence of geocriticism is connected to a broader spatial term in the humanities and the social sciences. We study anything related to the space, especially not the outer space. We are referring to the spatial term, and especially in the humanities and social sciences, we study about a region, about a particular space. So geocriticism was used or is used as a tool for understanding this literature. More recently, with the rise of geocriticism, literary geography and the special humanities more broadly, the importance of speciality has only grown. You have the literary geography, which is also being studied under this particular banner, and the special humanities is giving more importance to speciality in the recent times, and many of the people, researchers are working on speciality in literature. Especially they study the architecture, the construction of a particular road in so and so manner, and it's about everything. It's about a particular region. It explores everything in detail. So the explosion in the number of books and articles on these subjects has been supplemented and supported by major international conferences in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. And you have, as I said earlier, literary geographies and geo-humanities, which are a new book series by Indiana University Press. Special humanities are Palgrave Macmillan's Geocriticism and Spatial Literary Studies. They are the books which are recently published as part of the geocriticism. And geocriticism, which has burgeoned in these last 10 or 15 years especially, partakes of this overall interest in space, place, and mapping, while also establishing its own place within literary and cultural studies. It's not like studying geography in isolation. It is an attempt to study the literature and cultural studies from the geographical perspective. You have something called literary geography, which is used as a term or a concept in understanding the particular cartography of a nation or a particular community. So assume we do not care much about the setting of a particular novel. Okay. And especially it so happens with Thomas Hardy. For example, he keeps writing about Wessex or Arkinarant's Malgudi. We do not know the importance of Malgudi or Wessex unless it is studied from geographical perspective. And there are very few attempts by the researchers to take up such study and to study completely the geographical space, place, and mapping of that particular city. It could be Malgudi or Wessex, have not happened so far, and probably geocriticism would help in locating, in cartographing probably the geography or geography of a particular region which is explored in the literature. So this is all about geocriticism, and there are also other emerging areas of humanities. Of course, it is already emerged eco-criticism. Most of us have studied in our bachelors and even in masters. Eco-criticism or eco-literature is also an emerged area in the humanities, which has something to do with the topography of a particular place, and it has something to do with the environmental science. And we cannot keep ourselves in isolation, literatures in isolation. It has something to do with the spirituality, it has something to do with the anthropology. So it is all integrated. You see how the disciplines are emerging with the interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity here. And economic criticism, it studies about the economics in literature. Okay, how money is being circulated, the concept of money in Shakespeare's plays, or how it operates throughout Shakespeare's plays. And it's all very simple. But theoretically, when we get into the details of it, it takes us along and explores itself. But they're all the recent areas. And you have cyborg studies, microaggression, humor criticism, relation with other arts or science. They are all the some of the emerging areas in the humanities. And it all happened. If we think of digital humanities, medical humanities, disability studies, trauma studies, or any studies for that matter, cyborg studies, humor criticism, and all that, it all happened because of the humanities interactions with natural sciences and the physical sciences. And such interactions should always happen for the development of the research, for the development of maybe again to give an humanistic touch to everything that we study, everything that the world is part of, everything at least we are part of. So we cannot isolate ourselves stating that I'm a student of humanities, literature, and therefore I have nothing to do with the political science. I cannot say that. We live in the era of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary studies, and it is the need of the hour to interact more with the other disciplines and learn from such interactions, and develop a theory of our own. So these are some of the concepts that I just wanted to speak about. If you have any questions or suggestions or anything that you would like to respond to, you're always welcome. And I thank Parul University for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It was a very wonderful session. as we already know that you talked about, the various humanities with various disciplinary, like, it's a multidisciplinary, such as the digital humanities, medical humanities, then cyborgs, then the fourth studies. So there is some relation, there is various relation, not with only humanities is, it's not only talking about the emotion, the feeling, okay, whatever we actually read in literature, but rather right now in current situation we are actually seeing that it is related, it is actually intersecting, it is actually just opposing with political science, with sociology, with geography, with medical, with biomedical, with with the nomad aboriginals. So it is not only a single point that we will be looking upon, it is rather a diverse field that we are actually leading into, and in today's 21st century it is actually a humanities is rather a very multidisciplinary subject. And people right for me, actually I was thinking that science is something which talks about the truth and fact, and humanities talk about the philosophical ideas, but emerging together, it's a very beautiful and unique concept that we always used to look in metaphysical. So it's a very metaphysical way of studying humanities in current situation, and I think this is very wonderful session. And from now onwards, the people might be getting the access towards the emerging fields of humanities, and we will be looking forward for the other sessions with you, sir. And it was very nice meeting you, and thank you a lot, sir. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Do we have any questions, Ishani?
Sir, actually we are run with time, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
It's fine then. That's all right. Thank you very
Yes, sir.
much.
But it was
Thank you
very
all
nice
for,
session, sir. We were
yeah,
looking forward for the other sessions also. So we will be posting you the doubts, the queries, and
that's all right.
we will be looking
That's
forward.
okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, one and all. See you.